my name's Toby Horrorboy, and today we're gonna make a puppet of Home from Welcome Home. I absolutely love puppets, but I've only ever made 2, and I desperately want to remake the Eddsworld one, so I'm hoping to get more puppet making experience from this project. Also, I was horrendously sick for the first half of this. I could barely sit up and I definitely shouldn't have been crafting. But let's get right into it. One of the reasons I chose to make Home is that I had a bunch of EVA foam floor mats left over from when we made Candymare. So if you were one of the people that helped fund that, thank you so much again, and you also helped with this. You would need a much softer foam to make most of the other characters, but Home is basically a cube. So EVA foam is perfect for him, and we're gonna start by cutting out the front, back, and side pieces. The front and back are the same, and so are the 2 side pieces. Once the 4 walls are cut out, we can clean up the edges with a rotary tool. And then look at the eye and mouth placement. Also, I'm gonna use the words door and mouth interchangeably here because that door is a mouth if I've ever seen one. We start by pinning down the mouth because it's the easiest part to put down. It's front and center at the very bottom, and we can then use that placement to position the eyes. Getting the proportions right on a project like this is really important. Home has a really particular shape, so we need to make sure that everything's sitting where it's supposed to and that it's about the right size. And of course, it has to be symmetrical. Now that we've figured out the placement, we can cut out the eyes and mouth. Home has a window on each side, so while we're here, we're gonna cut those out as well. And here you can start to see approximately what we're working with. My plan is to have the eyes, door, and side windows all move. The last piece we're going to cut out for now is a big rectangle in the back, and that's how we're going to access all of the control rods and mechanisms to make the puppet move. Now we can use the rotary tool to clean up everything that we just cut out. Pretty soon we're going to have to cover this in fabric, so we're going to make a pattern for that by tracing our pieces onto some paper, and we'll come back to that in a minute because it's time to start gluing Home together. I'm using contact cement because it's my favorite adhesive. If you've watched my videos before, you know what this is, and you've probably commented about wanting to eat it. So you apply the contact cement to both surfaces, let it become mostly touch dry, and then join them together. It's incredibly strong when used correctly, so I really can't afford to mess this up. Now that our walls are glued together, we can have a look at the base. This is just another rectangle of EVA foam. So we can cut it out, glue it on, and then that's the very base of our puppet done. To get Home to be that nice red color, we're going to be covering him with fleece. So we pin down the pattern that we made just before and cut it out. And as we're cutting it, we're leaving a bit of space for seam allowance, but we're leaving a lot of extra fabric at the top. With our 4 pieces cut out, we can pin them up and sew them together. And of course, we need to cut out and sew on that bottom piece as well. Before we move on, we need to grade the seams. Fleece is a very bulky material, and we don't want any of the extra bulk from the seams showing through to the other side. So I'm cutting each side of the seam to different lengths to grade them. This next part is such a minor detail. Only myself and you guys are gonna see this, but I wanted to do it anyway. Home has a big heart underneath him, and I thought it was too cute to not include. So we cut our heart out and hand sew it on using a blanket stitch. The red on red isn't going to be super visible, so I used black embroidery floss and that decorative stitch to hopefully help with that. Now that the sewing part is done, we can put it on and secure it. All of that excess fabric that we left at the top was so that we could fold it over and use contact cement to glue it down. That was really easy, and unfortunately this next part is going to be a bit finicky, because now we have to do all of our cutouts. The fleece has to be pulled taut enough to not allow for any wrinkles, but it can't be pulled so tight that it warps. I cut notches in the fleece to help it conform to the shape of the foam. We started with the eyes and then did the mouth, sides, and back. Ideally, I'd like for this whole puppet to look good, but if there are gonna be any weird bits, I would rather that they be literally anywhere other than the very front. That's the base of Home done, and now we can look at the more puppety bits. The first moving piece I want to do is the eyes. We start by patterning and cutting out a big slab of EVA foam, and this is going to be the whites of the eyes. You can definitely see the dark color of the foam through the fleece here, so we're going to seal it with Mod Podge and paint it white so that the eyes are nice and vibrant. And then we can cover it with fleece. So this piece needs to be inset into the head, partially because we need to have room to move the pupils, but also because I wanted these to be like follow me eyes, which is a technique used on a lot of fursuits. And we're going to do this by making a ledge along the perimeter of where the eyes are going to sit. I used EVA foam for the bulk of the ledge, and then layered some white craft foam on top so I didn't have to paint it. Then all of those pieces have to get covered in white fleece so that they match the eyes. There was a lot of trial and error here, and this video would have to be twice as long to show all of that. I'm not going to make you sit through that, but we just needed to make sure that everything lined up perfectly and it all went okay. Now that the 2 side pieces, the 2 bottom pieces, and that doorway arch are glued in, we can have a look at the pupils. And we're going to gonna cut those out of craft foam and cover them in black fleece. So it was around this time that I realized my initial plan for the eye mechanism wasn't gonna work. I had this like elaborate scheme of how I was gonna do it, and it might have gone okay, but this is definitely better. So I'm cutting holes in the eye base for the pupil's control rod to move around in. And I had to be so careful to not cut that too big. Because they're just made of craft foam and fleece, the pupils are currently really floppy. So we're gonna add some structure by gluing in popsicle sticks. Each control rod is gonna be 2 pieces of EVA foam with a popsicle stick in the middle for stability. And those get put together with contact cement and then glued onto the pupils. Before we can go any further, we need to glue in the eye base. Then we can put our pupils in and glue in a bar to connect them. And that's so we can operate both pupils at the same time so they're always facing the same way. So those are our eyes done, and now we're gonna make the door. I still had the foam cut out, so I started by trimming it down. And then I cut that shape, but a little bit smaller, out of the yellow fleece. And we're gonna cut out a strip of blue fleece to be the border. Then we can pin and sew the yellow and blue together. We stretch the fabric over the foam piece, making sure that it's even. And then we use contact cement to glue it down. So there are 3 black lines on the door, and we're gonna measure out their placement and then draw them on with a fine liner and a ruler. We cut our hinge out of some 5mm high density EVA foam, and we heat form it into shape using the heat gun. And that can get glued straight to our door. Now, the back part of the door looks really bad. It is so ugly. And it probably won't be visible from the outside of the puppet, but it might be, and I don't want to take that chance. So we're gonna cut out the shape of the door, but a little bit smaller from blue fleece, and glue it on the back. But what's a door without a door handle? Probably a door that's hard to open. That's not a real riddle. We can make a door handle very easily by using a button. I'm using a shank button from my grandmother's button jar, because this style of button doesn't have any visible buttonholes that we'd need to cover up. And we're gonna cut the shank off so that there's more surface area for when we glue it. Now we can sand it and Mod Podge it so that the paint will stick a bit better and paint it red. Then we can seal the paint with more Mod Podge and glue it down with just a dab of super glue. And we still need to be able to open and close the door. So we're using the same technique that we used for the eye mechanism. And this control rod will probably be visible from outside of the puppet. So we're covering it in black fleece to help it blend in a bit. We make sure to glue the fleece down at both ends as well, and then we can glue the whole piece to the back of the door. Then we can glue the hinge on, and we've got a functioning door that we can puppeteer. The next section that we're going to focus on is the side windows. We have the pattern for our window pieces from when we made the pattern for the fabric earlier. So we can cut those 2 rectangles out of our EVA foam and then cut them each in half vertically. And then we use contact cement to cover them all in yellow fleece. Much like the door, the windows also have handles. And thankfully I had 4 smaller matching shank buttons. So we can go right ahead and cut the shanks off, sand them, Mod Podge them, paint them red, and then Mod Podge them again. Now we can make the window backs a little bit less ugly and start making some more control rods. And we do that by gluing a popsicle stick in between 2 pieces of EVA foam. And they then get covered in black fleece. I made these a fair bit shorter than the control rod for the door because I'm not going to be as far away from them. Each window gets a rectangle of high density EVA foam to work as the hinge. So we can go right ahead and glue those to each of our window pieces. And right where the hinge ends on each piece, we need to glue in the control rod. Then we can line up the windows and glue them in. And those are our windows. They're functional. But we're not totally done with them. The last thing we need to do is use super glue to glue on the handles. And with that, all of our moving pieces are finished, but we've still got a fair way to go. Before we do any more fun and exciting stuff, I want to pause for a minute and just fix something up. You might have noticed that you can clearly see the foam base when the door opens and that it really doesn't look good. So what we're going to do is cut out and glue in some black fleece to use as flooring. It might not be super noticeable now, but it'll make a huge difference in how the finished product looks. So we're just gluing that in one section at a time and working our way towards the back. We've got a little bit of glue seeping through in some places, but the doorway area is clear and that's the only bit that actually matters. Everything else is a bonus and just me wanting things to be relatively neat on the inside. You can see how much better that looks, and it helps hide the control rod. And it's window frame time. Home has yellow window frames that sit in front of his eyes, and we're going to be making them out of craft foam. And patterning this was actually a nightmare. The frame is really thin and it has to sit in exactly the right spot so that the edges of the windows are covered. And the proportions have to be exact or it'll look so weird. And I can say that with confidence because this took me like 3 tries. I ended up having to trace it off my iPad, but I got it in the end. So we cut out our pattern and trace it onto 1mm thick craft foam. I used a yellow foam in the very unlikely event that any of the backing color is going to be visible. I really didn't want to have to paint both sides. And then we take a precision craft knife and carefully cut out both window frames. But we can't just leave those as raw foam. Well, we could, but I don't want to. So we do a few coats of Mod Podge to seal them and then paint them yellow. I would have loved to do these out of fleece as well, but wrapping the fleece around a foam base would be super bulky and just the fleece on its own would be way too flimsy. Once we're happy with the paint, I went and did a matte clear coat. Next up, we need to put our window frames aside so we can make our windowsills. I patterned the scalloping and cut them out of blue fleece, and then we just pin them on and hand sew them down. When you're using a material like fleece, you can actually take a pin and brush the fleece over the stitches to help hide them. It really does make a huge difference. The backing here doesn't have any fabric to sew to, so we're going to use contact cement to glue down the excess inside the eyes. And now we can take our window frames and glue them on. There is absolutely no room for error here, so this was very stressful. Thankfully, I managed to get them both on without any glue showing around the edges. Home is really starting to come together. So the next part that we're going to focus on is the roof. We start by cutting out 2 rectangles from EVA foam. I beveled the top connecting edge of both pieces with the rotary tool so that the roof will sit at the correct angle when glued. And then we take some contact cement and glue them together. I glued a strip of fleece on the inside to add some support. There wasn't a lot of surface area for the glue to stick to, and we don't want our roof breaking. Home also has a chimney on his left side, so we're going to cut the hole out for that now. And with that done, it's time to cover the roof in fabric. We cut our blue fleece a fair bit bigger than the foam pieces. And this is so we can cover the underside of the roof and make sure that there's no visible foam anywhere on Home's outside. Now we machine sew up the center seam and we can start gluing the fabric to the roof section by section. I did the sides before the front and back because that'll look the cleanest once the roof is attached. The corners get folded and glued under, and I used a dab of super glue to make sure they were laying flat. I also glued down the fabric around the chimney hole, and I shouldn't have done that before making the chimney. I ended up having to cut it a bit bigger and then re-glue it, but you'll see that in just a minute. Right now, it's time to make the chimney. We cut 4 rectangles of EVA foam and glue the sides together. Then we used the rotary tool to clean up the edges. I traced it onto paper to create the pattern and then cut the chimney cover out of fleece. We then sew it up into a tube and slide it onto the chimney. And now we can glue down the excess fabric at both ends. And because we don't want any visible foam, I cut a strip of black fleece and glued it to the inner chimney. To match the windowsills, the chimney has red scalloping at the base. So we cut that out of fleece and hand sew it on. Now that we know the actual size of the chimney, I have to fix up the chimney hole that I cut earlier. And at long last, it's time to glue everything together. We're gonna start by figuring out exactly where the roof is gonna sit. There's a bit of overhang at the front and back, and I wanted those to be even. I'm using pins to mark where our contact cement is gonna go on the roof piece so that there's hopefully no visible glue. I did this all in one go, and I had to be very precise and fast so that nothing terrible happened. So I glued the roof on, going bit by bit to make sure everything was sitting in the right spot. Now that our roof is attached, we can do the same thing to the chimney. The very last thing I want to do is clean up the inside of the chimney with some black paint. I was a bit too messy when I trimmed down the black fleece earlier, and it was really bothering me. And with that, our puppet is done. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Our next project is a Plushtrap animatronic from Five Nights at Freddy's, and his skinning video should be up in a week or 2. I also have a video planned to show you guys the first thing I ever sewed, but that's only if we hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It's very poorly made and Sonic the Hedgehog related, but that's all I'm gonna say about it. Anyway, here's our home puppet.